We're going to start our unit on web audio and video with a very brief history lesson to show a little bit about how we got to where we are with audio and video on the web, and it'll put a little bit of context around some of the things that we learn as we go through the JavaScript part and the coding that we're going to do this week. And the first thing that I think is sort of a little bit fun sometimes is to look at what audio and video looked like on the web not all that long ago. So the first version of video streaming that was available on the web came from a company called Real Networks. I think they were called Real Audio at the time. And the version 4 of their product introduced the concept of Real Video. Now, I would imagine that most of you don't even have the Real Player installed anymore, but it wasn't that long ago that if you didn't have Real Player, there was no streaming video and audio on the web. And at the time, those of us who were computer geeks were absolutely amazed that you could do video streaming on the web. And here's a little bit of what it looked like. This is an actual video stream that comes from Harvard, recording of Class Day exercises from 2001. And let's take a look at what that looks like in real video.
And to our ancestors. But we now have the privilege to be creative and compassionate. Not everyone can help her brother. You have that privilege. Not everyone can save his sister.
So that's the real size at which it was encoded, and that was sort of a typical way that somebody might get to see that video. If you were a computer geek, you were amazed people all over the world could watch this in a way they never could have had access to it before. If you didn't have like Cambridge cable TV, you didn't have a video feed of commencement. And on the other hand, if you were a video professional, someone who's really into the quality of broadcast video, this was appalling, because the quality is so poor. Now, it's important that this was something that came from a proprietary company at the time. It's because the only way to do it, it was right on the cutting edge of what was possible with internet technology. Of course, today, the fact that you're watching this video right now, presumably at a higher quality level than that, there's a certain irony to that. And you could say, well, what's different? What changed between 2001 and now that made this the experience you're having rather than the one that people had watching that 15 years ago or 14, however many years ago? Well, the things that are different is really everything's different. The codecs, which is the way that video gets turned into a bit stream of ones and zeros that can be sent across the network, are better than they were. They're better because the mathematics and the science have improved and people have figured out other ways to do it. And they're better because computers are more powerful, so you can use techniques that weren't practical in 2001 now. In fact, if you tried to do reasonably high quality video on the network, on a computer back in 2001, or a little earlier than that, I suppose, you actually had to have a special hardware card plugged into your computer that was a video accelerator in order to make it work because the processor in the computer wasn't powerful enough to decode the video. Now, this is still an issue today, and we'll look a little bit about that as we get into the lesson. Not every device has the same amount of power either in its processor or in its battery, and you see this particularly on mobile devices. But the CPUs are faster than they were, both for playback and the creation of the video. Of course, everybody's got a lot more bandwidth. That thing that we just watched was made to be seen on a dial-up connection across a telephone line at 56 kilobits. 56K is a pretty slow internet connection. And the last thing that's made a huge difference is standards. So back in 2001 and times around then, there were a bunch of proprietary companies that were all trying to compete in the video arena, and there were no standards around protocols and codecs and things that are needed to deliver video from the server to the client. And so with all the different things that were going on in the marketplace, you had a really impossible situation. I called it a buffet of plugins. You had to get a plugin that would plug into your browser. You had to get a server that matched the kind of player that you had. You had to have an encoder that would create video in the format that server could serve and that player could play. And the dependencies were all over the place. Some of them would work on Windows and not on Macs, and some of them were the other way around. Some things said that they could do everything, but they weren't necessarily good at it. In a lot of cases, you ended up having a multiple infrastructure to support the different things that you need to support. Well, this one's for Macs, we're using QuickTime Server, and this one's for Windows, we're using Video or whatever the company happens to be. And so this was really quite a expensive and time-consuming situation to try and deliver video, even at that quality, to the places that you wanted it. And then came Flash. All of a sudden, in early 2000s, the Flash plugin, which is a product that a lot of people had already because it was used for animations and things like that already, the Flash plugin started supporting video. And this actually created a wonderful circumstance for people that were doing video and audio on the web, because instead of having to have one set of infrastructure for Windows and a different infrastructure for Mac and another infrastructure for Internet Explorer and a different infrastructure for Netscape or for Firefox when that became available, there were so many different dependencies, and then suddenly this thing called Flash, which pretty much ran everywhere, supported video, and it was wonderful. It wasn't perfect, but it was wonderful because it took a lot of the complexity away. A single plugin that everybody's got. You didn't have to tell somebody, oh, you got to download Real Player to watch this. Well, I don't have Real Player. Everybody had Flash. And so it was cross-browser, cross-platform, and it supported a de facto standard for web video. At the time, there was a video file format called FLV, and then later it started supporting MPEG-4 or MP4. And so you could do all sorts of things. And of course, the Flash environment is an environment that you can write applications in. It always was. So you could build applications on top of your video that did a lot of cool things. And that was great. Then came the iPad. And when the iPad came out and Apple decided we're not supporting Flash, and you can argue as to whether that was a good decision or a bad decision or whether it was strictly a business decision or a technical one. I've seen all those discussions that go on and don't have a particular subscription to one opinion or another on that. What I know is what it did practically for people wanting to support video is it meant you couldn't count on Flash being everywhere anymore. Couple that with the fact that browsers began to support video with HTML5, and it actually creates a world that's starting to look a little bit like it used to, where you had to pay attention. Well, what browser is this person going to use on what platform, and what if they're on an Android phone, and what if they're on an iPhone, what if it's a new iPhone versus an old iPhone? These things all become an issue again today because of the fragmentation of the delivery of video. It is actually improving a little bit as time goes on. Standards are catching up. And the reason I talk about this is because when we get into using the JW Player library to play video, this is one of the real reasons that people use libraries for video. It's kind of like one of the reasons people use jQuery for web pages, because it takes a lot of the incompatibilities away. It just handles it for you. But what we do see today is just in the browser itself, even if you're not using a plugin, if you're not using any library, HTML5 does allow you to put audio and video into the browser. It allows you to interact with it with JavaScript. They're just HTML elements, just like the other elements that we've been working with. There's still problems with compatibility. Certain files and codec types will play on some browsers and not others, or some devices and not others. And the HTML5 capability by itself is still sort of catching up with the things that Flash and some of the proprietary platforms used to do, like encryption and rights management, secure streaming live, things like that are things where HTML5 is still a place where you can't do everything you need to do, and some of these proprietary platforms are going to continue to exist for a while until HTML5 gets standardized around video. So why is all this going on around video, and how come it's different? Well, think about what happens when you link an image in a web page. You put an image tag in there, you put a source to where it goes, the image downloads to the browser shows it, right? And the image can be cached so that the next time you go to the web page, the web page can load faster because that image may already be in the browser's cache. And the browser natively supports a bunch of image formats, PNG and JPEG and GIF and so forth. So what's different with video? Well, for one thing, video is huge. Relatively speaking, the files are very, very large, and it's time-sensitive delivery. If you're waiting for an image to load on a web page, you're probably not going to wait very long, and it probably doesn't matter very much. But if you've got video bits coming down the pipe and you're watching the video and it keeps stopping because it has to buffer and load more, Or if something happens in the network and the packets start arriving in the wrong order, the player's got to be able to deal with that. And of course, it's because of this large ecosystem of different formats and codecs and delivery protocols like RTMP and RTSP and MMS and PNM. Those ones are pretty much out of date. And of course, HTTP. There's a lot of different ways to deliver video that are used in different circumstances. Now, we're not going to talk that much about protocols as we go into this week, but formats and codecs, we're going to go over that a little bit because it's just good to be aware of what the situation is around what it means when somebody says, well, what format is that video? These words are used colloquially, formats and codecs and players, very often interchangeably, and that's not necessarily wrong, but we're going to look at a little more precision so we understand what's a format, what's a codec, what's a player, and then we're going to dive right into the JavaScript, and we're going to start putting audio and video on web pages and doing some cool stuff. So let's get on with that.